Usually I wait till after the Stanley Cup Finals are over to start back up the Deal or No Deal series, but we've already seen a couple of trades over the last few weeks, and I feel like June 1st is kind of the unofficial start date of the offseason anyways, and there's a lot of big name players that are rumored to be on the trade market right now, so I figured, what the hell, I feel like today is as good a time as any to start up another season of Deal or No Deal. If you're new to the channel and you've never seen one of these before, it's a pretty simple concept. Basically, you guys send in mock trades, I pick out a handful to review and talk about in a video, and ultimately give my thoughts on if I think it is a good deal or no deal. If you guys enjoy this series and you want another episode in the next few weeks, maybe one before the draft, which is at the end of June, then be sure to leave this video a like. And if this is your first time checking out the channel and you want NHL content just like this all year round, hit that subscribe button. And with that being said, let's go ahead and kick off this episode with the first mock trade from Drew NYE, who says to Montreal, Martin Necas; to Carolina, Jordan Harris, Winnipeg's first round pick, and Riley Kidney. Montreal has been in talks to go after a player like Necas this offseason, while with Carolina possibly losing one of or both Shea or Pesci, they add a solid defenseman that can crack the lineup in Harris, as well as a decent forward prospect in Kidney, as well as a first round draft pick that they could possibly flip if needed in a Kotkaniemi trade. It does sound like Montreal is probably the front runners right now for Martin Necas. It makes sense. He fits the mold of the kind of players they've been targeting over these last couple of years, players that are still relatively young but are already established at the NHL level that can contribute to Montreal's success right away, but also be a part of the long-term future. Guys like Kirby Dach and Alex Newhook, previous examples of them going out and doing something like this. However, when it comes to Necas, he's definitely a higher caliber player right now, I would say, than guys like Newhook and Dach were at the time they were traded to Montreal. Necas has had back-to-back 20-plus goal, 50-plus point seasons. He is a legit top six forward, and when it comes to Necas, I feel like there's still another level he can get to. I think this is a guy with the potential to be, an 80 point a season type of player. So from the Montreal side of things, I really like this mock trade, and I think Montreal would probably take something like this in a heartbeat. However, when it comes to Carolina, I'm not so sure if this would be enough to get a deal done. I don't think the value is there. I like Jordan Harris. I think he's done well over these last couple of seasons, albeit a bit of a small sample size, playing limited minutes. He has put up good results, but like you said, with Carolina potentially losing guys like Brady Shea and Brett Pesci this summer, is Jordan Harris somebody that could come in and, be thrusted into a top four role? I'm not so sure. I feel like if you're Carolina and you're trading Necas, you probably want someone in return who's a bit more established than Jordan Harris. And if you're not getting that kind of player in return, then I think you'd need much more valuable, draft picks and prospects as part of the package. And with this mock trade, I don't think you're getting that. Winnipeg's first is going to be a later first round pick, and Riley Kidney, solid prospect. But again, I don't think this is the kind of package that would blow Carolina away. So while I do think we're on the right track here with Necas going to Montreal, it's definitely something that I could see happening at some point this offseason. I am going to say no deal to this mock trade from Carolina's point of view, just from a pure value standpoint. The next mock trade we have comes from Grindline Pod, who says Wings send a third and Jonathan Berggren to the Flames for Jacob Markstrom. The Red Wings could definitely use somebody like Jacob Markstrom to come in and solidify their goaltending position for the next couple of seasons. Jacob Markstrom is still signed for 2 more years at a cap hit of $6 million. This past season, the Red Wings goaltending situation was less than ideal, I would say. Alex Lyon, who came into the season as the Red Wings' third-string goaltender, wound up being the starter for the team for the majority of the season, played the most games, and Lyon started really well for the Red Wings, but towards the back half of the season, his performance definitely took a pretty big dip, and I'm not going to sit here and blame Lyon for that either. This is a guy who, prior to last season with the Red Wings, had never played more than 15 games in a single season, and then all of a sudden, he plays 44 with Detroit, and those 44 games weren't really spread out across the whole season either. They were all pretty condensed, like him starting consecutive games or starting 3 of 4, 4 of 5. The Red Wings ran Alex Lyon into the ground, and I'm not really going to blame them for that either because they didn't really have a choice. But if the Red Wings are serious about being legit playoff contenders again next season, I don't think you can start next season with a goaltending tandem of an injury-prone Ville Husso and a guy in Alex Lyon who I just don't think should be relied upon to start 40-plus games in a season. So I definitely think it makes sense that the Red Wings could be interested in adding a goaltender this summer, and while Markstrom doesn't really fit the timeline of the Red Wings, being 34 years old, I think he could be a really solid stopgap over these next couple of seasons, and then hopefully when Markstrom's contract is up at the end of the 2025-26 season, maybe somebody like Sebastian Cossa is ready to take on a full-time role. So from the Red Wings side of things, I would not hate this mock trade at all. I am someone who feels like if Detroit does indeed end up trading Berggren, they're gonna end up regretting it because because I feel like this is a guy who is going to immediately pop off given consistent middle six minutes in the NHL, but at this point it just doesn't seem like that's going to happen in Detroit, and a trade is the most likely outcome for Berggren. Now looking at this trade from the point of view of the Calgary Flames, I'm not sure if Berggren and a third would be enough for them to trade Markstrom. As much as I really like Berggren's game and I'm high on him and I think he's going to be great in the NHL, I have a hard time believing this would be the best package Calgary could get for Markstrom, so I think I'm going to go ahead and say no deal to this mock trade as well. I just feel like teams that are maybe a little bit more desperate to address their goaltending situation right now, like the Kings or the Maple Leafs, would definitely be willing to one-up this trade package. Moving along now to the next mock trade. This one comes from West Films, who says to Nashville, Mitch Marner and Joseph Woll; to Toronto, Saros, Evangelista, a 2025 first and 2025 third. Nashville turns a young forward in Evangelista into Marner while still getting an injury-prone goalie back who can play good for them, and Toronto gets their goalie, a young forward back who's a former London Knight you can play with Cowan, and picks for a star talent in Marner. In my opinion, Nashville definitely makes a ton of sense as a trade destination for Mitch Marner. The Predators have the kind of assets as to where they can put together a really enticing package for the Leafs, and Nashville also has a ton of cap flexibility moving forward, which helps their chances of signing Marner to an extension after a trade. I think this mock trade makes a ton of sense for both sides. Both teams address needs. When it comes to the Maple Leafs, you get a guy in UC Saros who is one of the, upper echelon starting goaltenders in the National Hockey League. He's been a Vezina Trophy candidate in the past. You also get back a 22-year-old winger in Evangelista, who obviously isn't going to directly replace the production that you're going to lose trading Mitch Marner, but he was very solid playing in Nashville's middle six this past season, scored 16 goals, had 39 points, and again, at just 22 years old, I think it's safe to assume that Evangelista is only going to continue to get better, and you're also getting a couple of draft picks with the first and third, which the Leafs could definitely use. They've traded a lot of their draft picks over the last, 4 or 5 years. I really like this mock trade a lot. I'm going to go ahead and say deal. Some people may think that this is way too much for Nashville to give up, but I think getting Joseph Woll back here, along with Mitch Marner, is a big part of this mock trade too. Joseph Woll, albeit a small sample size, has shown a ton of promise at the NHL level, so you add him to the organization, along with already having a top goaltending prospect like Yaroslav Askarov. I feel like even after trading Saros, they'd be left with a pretty solid goaltending situation moving forward. The next mock trade we have comes from Christian, who says Islanders get Nikolai Ehlers, Jets get 20th pick and Oliver Wahlstrom. Islanders are rumored to be a front runner for Ehlers, so I picked them. The return package, the Islanders always trade their first round pick for NHL ready talent. Wahlstrom is there because he needs a change of scenery as his ice time has lowered this season. I think right from the hop, I am going to go ahead and say no deal to this trade. I do feel like there's a pretty good chance that we could see Ehlers traded at some point this offseason. I made a video a couple of weeks ago going over some star NHL players that I think could be traded, and Ehlers was one of the players on my list. That being said, if you're the Jets and you're going to trade Ehlers, I think you have to get a better package in return than something like this. I'm not really high on Oliver Wahlstrom at this point. I think he could use a change of scenery, but in a trade, for maybe another younger, former top draft pick who's struggling, not somebody like Nikolai Ehlers, who's a bona fide top six forward, a guy who I think is capable of being around a point per game in a season. The Winnipeg Jets are a deep team as well. I don't even think there's any guarantee that Oliver Wahlstrom would make their lineup next season. Wahlstrom definitely has talent, there's no denying that, but up until this point, he's really yet to put it all together at the NHL level, and he's a fringe NHLer at this point, I would say, and if you take away the fact that he was a former 11th overall draft pick, I don't think this is all that intriguing of a piece for the Jets. Now, yes, you also have the Jets getting the 20th overall draft pick as part of this mock trade, but even still, I just don't think the value is nearly enough for the Jets to pull the trigger. The next mock trade we have comes from NeoXD, who says to Minnesota, Trevor Zegras, Anaheim gets 13th overall, a 2025 second, and Liam Ogren. Minnesota gets that first line center they desperately need to play with Kaprizov and likely Boldy. Anaheim gets the 13th overall pick, which can turn into a very solid player, as well as Liam Ogren, a solid prospect who looked pretty decent in 4 NHL games he played this year. The extra second is obviously just a solid draft pick to have a possibility to trade or just draft with. When it comes to the Wild needing a first line center to play with Kaprizov, I think they're hoping Marco Rossi is eventually going to be that guy, and obviously they do have Joel Eriksson, who I think is one of the better two-way centers in the league, but it seems like Minnesota wants to keep those guys split up to really balance out the lineup. I do feel like Minnesota is a team to watch out for as a team that could make a big splash over these next couple of seasons. After the 2024-25 season, they're going to have a lot of newfound cap space as the bio penalties for Parise and Suter go all the way down from around $7.3 million to $800K, and that's for each player as well, not in total, so they're going to have, around $14 million in cap space freed up after this upcoming season. And I think Zegras would definitely be an intriguing fit for Minnesota. Imagine him and Kirill Kaprizov on the same line. That would probably be one of the more fun lines to watch in the entire league. That being said, I think I am going to go ahead and say no deal to this mock trade. I feel like this would be a lot for Minnesota to give up. The 13th overall draft pick, as well as Liam Ogren, who was a 19th overall draft pick by Minnesota in 2022. He's still just 20 years old and, like you said, looked pretty solid in the 4 games he played for Minnesota this season. So I think it would be kind of foolish for Minnesota to trade Ogren before at least getting a look at him, playing a full NHL season. Moving along now, we have another Marty Necas mock trade. This one comes from Dwayne the Walk Johnson, who says to Canucks, Marty Necas, to the Hurricanes, Philip Hronek. So a good old 1-for-1 swap here. Kind of reminds me of the Bowen Byram for Casey Middlestat swap between the Sabres and Avalanche that we saw before the trade deadline. I actually really like the idea of this mock trade. Both of these guys are restricted free agents and in need of new contracts this summer. Philip Hronek had a strong regular season with the Vancouver Canucks, put up a career high 48 points, but I feel like he kind of left a sour taste in Canucks fans' mouth due to his playoff performance. I like Hronek's game a lot, though. I don't think he's a guy who, should be relied upon to be the number 1 defenseman on a team, but he's a really solid, top 4 puck-moving defenseman, has a really heavy shot, and he's actually somebody whose playstyle I think would fit Carolina's playstyle really well. And we talked earlier in the video about how the Hurricanes could potentially lose both Brady Shea and Brett Pesce this offseason. If that happens, then you have to imagine they're going to be in the market for defensemen. I also said earlier when we talked about the Marty Necas trade that I think Carolina would want an established NHLer in return, and they'd be getting that here in Philip Hronek. And for the Vancouver Canucks, assuming Elias Lindholm doesn't re-sign, I think Marty Necas would be a beautiful replacement for Lindholm, and depending on who you ask, it could even be looked at as an upgrade over Lindholm. Again, I really like this mock trade, probably because I'm a sucker for the 1-for-1 swaps, but I'm going to go ahead and say deal to this one. If a trade like this were to happen, it would leave Vancouver with a pretty big hole on the right side of their blue line, but that's something that the Canucks could address through free agency potentially, as there's actually a lot of solid right shot defensemen that are set to hit the open market, guys like Pesce, Montour, Alexander Carrier, Sean Walker, or even somebody like Chris Tanev, who obviously the Canucks are very familiar with. And now finally finishing out this episode with the last mock trade from Gavin Rector, who says Ullmark for Chychrun and a 2nd round draft pick. Linus Ullmark is another player who, like Nikolai Ehlers, was in that video I made a couple of weeks ago talking about some star players that I think could be traded at some point during this offseason, and I feel like Ottawa definitely makes some sense for Ullmark. The Senators' goaltending this past season was not great. The only problem is it was only the first year of a 5-year contract that was given out to Jonas Korpisalo, so does it make sense for Ottawa to go out and trade for a goaltender who is going to need a new contract after next season? It's likely going to be in for a big raise when you already have someone like Korpisalo, who again still has 4 more years left at a cap hit of $4 million. If you're going to trade for Ullmark, I feel like you almost have to find a way to unload the Korpisalo contract, which I feel like would be pretty difficult to do. So I really just don't know how this would work from the Ottawa Senators side of things. I think for Boston, this would be a real solid trade. Imagine adding Jacob Chychrun to that blue line, giving them a top 4 of, Chychrun, McAvoy, and then Lindholm and Carlo. That is a pretty nasty top 4 on paper. I think Boston would definitely entertain the idea of this trade, but like I said, for Ottawa, I just don't think it makes a whole lot of sense, so I'm going to have to say no deal. So that is going to wrap up this episode of NHL Deal or No Deal. As always, I want to give a huge thank you to every single one of you who submitted a mock trade, even the ones that don't get featured in the video. Just know I read them all, and I appreciate all of you guys. If you guys enjoy this series and you want another episode in the next couple of weeks before the draft, then be sure to leave this video a like. That is definitely the best way to let me know that you enjoyed, and it does help out the videos a ton. And most importantly, if this was your first time checking out the channel and you want NHL content just like this all year round, hit that subscribe button, and I'll talk to you all again soon.